Kedesh Hey, which is a pretty big Igeres HaKedesh. And to go straight to the point, Igeres HaKedesh Hey talks about, guess what? Tzedakah. Pretty wild guess when you're learning the Alter Rebbe's Igeres HaKedesh. But he gives you a long introduction. The gist of this Igeres HaKedesh is to bring out what is advantageous about this world, the physical world versus the spiritual worlds. And in this Igeres HaKedesh, he's going to tell you that it says in Medrash, the Eibishter created the worlds with two letters, Yud and K. So the Chazal say that the Elam Haba was created with the letter Yud, and Elam Hazeh was created with the letter Hey. What does this mean? So the Alter Rebbe in this Igeres HaKedesh is going to give us an interesting interpretation, which will come down to something like this: that Elam Haba was created with both Yud and Hey. Elam Hazeh was created with both Yud and Hey, but in Elam Haba, the Yud is so emphasized that the Hey is like not there. And in Elam Hazeh, which was also created with the Yud and the Hey, but the Hey is so emphasized and like the Yud is not there. And basically the difference is going to be the Yud is going to show on the Ruchnius of the Asius of the world, and the Hey is going to show on the Gashmius of the world, the Chaymer. So in Elam Haba there's also Hey, there's also Chaymer HaAsius, but it's a world of Ruchnius. In Elam Hazeh, even though there's also Ruchnius, there's also Yud, which is Ruchnius, but it's a world which is so totally focused on Gashmius that it's primarily created with the Chaymer HaAsius, which is represented by the letter Hey. And the Rebbe is going to say, that's why in this world we have the advantage of action, of doing physical mitzvahs. You understand that the physical mitzvahs is revealing the godliness of the letter Hey. So this is basically the gist of this Igeres HaKedesh. But just like in the last two Igeres HaKedesh, right? Gimel and Dalet also spoke about tzedakah. But in explaining tzedakah, the Alter Rebbe gave us a long hezber. In the Igeres HaKedesh Gimel, he spoke about the coat of mail and the helmet. And in the Igeres HaKedesh Dalet, he spoke about Milah, Pnimius de Kamila, and Chitonius de Kamila. In the Igeres HaKedesh, he's going to talk about words. I was going to say that words are made up of a number of parts. There is the idea that the word communicates. That's going to come from Bina. There are the words themselves, which can be divided into two parts. The Ruchnius of the words, which come from Chochmah. And the Gashmius of the words, which come from Malchus. So the build-up, the design of this Igeres HaKedesh is going to revolve around these 3 points. The idea that your words are communicating, the Ruchnius of the word, comes from Bina. The Ruchnius of the words themselves, the Tzura, comes from the letter Yud, from Chochmah. And the Chayme, the actual air, the letter Hey, which is the air which amplifies the sounds of the 22 letters, this comes from Malchus. And his point is going to be that in the Ruchnius Dika worlds, there's so much emphasis on the Ruchnius of the Asius that we say it comes from the letter Yud. And in this world, there's so much emphasis on the Gashmius of the Asius that we say it comes from the letter Hey. And of course, his point is going to be the most important thing is the letter Hey and action. And of course, of all actions, there's no action greater than the action of giving tzedakah. So let's now begin this Igeres HaKedesh. It says a pasuk, Igeres HaKedesh Hey. Vayaz David Shem. David HaMelech made for himself a name. It's a pasuk. David HaMelech made for himself a name. In other words, David HaMelech created a permanence for himself. Yeah, you exist. Everybody exists. Eventually, they pass away, and eventually they're forgotten. Vayaz David Shem. David HaMelech made his name be forever. Not just in the we talk about it, but in the world of the Eibush, that David created for himself a reality, something which is not going away, a name, an identity. Pirish B'Zeir HaKadosh, the Zeir says, what's the significance of David HaMelech making himself a name? Mishum Shenem, the pasuk says. David HaMelech was doing justice and righteousness and tzedakah to all his people. David HaMelech did mishpat. Mishpat means he was paskening fair halachas of mammon ben adam lachavede, and tzedakah he gave lots of tzedakah. So David HaMelech was doing good stuff. Bachar Rab Shimon b'Yamas, Rab Shimon Yochai cried and he said, Man ovid shmo kadisha b'chol yema. Who creates the holy name every day? Man de yahiv tzedakah lemiskini v'chuli. One who gives tzedakah to people who are needy. So he translates not Vayaz David Shem, David HaMelech made his own name. He translates Vayaz David Shem, he created the Eibishter's name, Shmo Kadisha. If you want to create the Eibishter's name, you do it through giving tzedakah, which is a concept found in Kabbalah in a lot of places, that when you do mitzvahs, right, you guys learned about mitzvah maimed. HaKadosh Baruch Hu maniach tefillin, they're putting on tefillin, really basically is you're creating Atzilus. There's in Chassidus a discussion that's called Oisim Ritzoynei Shel Mokim. It's based on Shas. You have in a lot of places in the Gemara. Oitzim Tzenish Malka means literally doing the will of Hashem. The Gemara says, Lagabi Fishidin Nezachen, Kan B'Bishasha, Eisem Tzenish Malka, Kan B'Bishasha, Ein Eisem Tzenish Malka. So the Pashas, it means when they're listening to Hashem, when they're not listening to Hashem. Chassidus says, Oitzim Tzenish Malka means when a Yid creates the Eibishter's will. Ein Eisem Tzenish Malka means they're doing the will of Hashem, but the one that He gave them, not the one that they're creating. But Yaz, David Shem is creating a new name in the Eibishter. So what does this mean? And why was it created? After through giving tzedakah. To explain the significance of David the Melech making the Eibishter's holy name through tzedakah. We have to preface what it says in Chazal, al pasuk on the pasuk Kibako Adishem Tzur Elamim, that the Eibishter is called Tzur Elamim, the rock and the creator. Tzur is from the word Tzayar, the former, the creator of the worlds. How did the Eibishter create the worlds? Beko. So the Gemara says, Behei Nivel Mazeh, that He created the letter, this world with the letter Hey, and Beyud Nivel Mabah, He created Mabah with the letter Yud. Pirush. What does this mean that this word is created with the letter Hey and that word is created with the letter Yud? So he says like this. Let's talk about Elam Haba first. The pleasure that Neshamas and Tzaddikim have. And then when they enjoy Miziv, Hashchina from the rays of the Shechina. Hameh, which radiates Gan Eden, the higher and lesser Gan Edens where they're presiding, where they live. What is the pleasure of Gan Eden? Shemis Angim, that they have pleasure. Bahasagosam, Vahaskalasam, in their intellectual reach and in their creativity. Hasaga is a word that usually means Bina. And Haskala is a word that usually means Chachma. Shemaskilim v'yodim, they're intuitive and they're knowledgeable. That's right, it's even from Chachma and Bina, or Das. Umasigim, and they reach. So Haskala would denote Chachma, Yadir would denote Das, and Hasaga would denote Bina. Eiz Hasaga, some measure of intellectual access. Be'er v'chayis, in the light and life. And of course you guys know by now that light and life means Seviv and Mamali. Hashafei, Hasham, which flows, and Ganed means Sev Baruch, from the infinite light of the Eibishter. Bebechinas Gil, in a revealed state, Linishma, some Beruach Minasam, to their level called Neshama, and the level called Ruach, right? That because their level called Neshama and the level called Ruach went to Gan Eden because of the Yiddishkeit they did, so therefore in Gan Eden shines a light. Lahav, and they should understand Lahasik and reach. Eiz Hasaga, some level of intellectual reach and godliness, and the pleasure of understanding the Eibishter. In Gan Eden, there's two steps: understanding Hashem and enjoying what you're understanding. This enjoyment is called experiencing godliness. And of course, it's called Echad ve'echad lefi madrigot lefi ma'asav. No two neshamas are the same. Each neshama understands and experiences the pleasure of his understanding in Gan Eden. Each one according to his level and according to how hard he worked. Right? So Gan Eden is a place where you're experiencing the tainug of the Yiddishkeit that you did. And the Rebbe says that this tainug is an inyan from understanding and the pleasure from understanding. Therefore, Gan Eden is called the world of Bina, because it's a place where you understand and experience the pleasure of your Yiddishkeit. You understand? So when you go to Gan Eden, you experience the pleasure of the delight and the experience of joy and pleasure of the Yiddishkeit that you did. This is true only in Gan Eden, and it's the Madrega of Bina. Why is it the Madrega of Bina? Because you're understanding godliness and therefore have pleasure. Understanding is Bina. Zakter, you should know. To be sure, the beginning of this hashpah of pleasure in Gan Eden does not begin with Bina, like it seems to be implying, but rather its root is Chachma, Shumakeir Haskala Vasaga, which is higher than the intellectual intuitiveness, Chachma, Vasaga, intellectual reach, which is Bina, Niki B'Shem Bina. Chachma is before understanding, that Kedim Shabal Leklal Gili Hasaga Vavana, before it's been revealed as a true intellectually accessible and comprehensible thing, where it's still in a vague Chochma-like state. Okay? It's hidden and concealed in that place. Just a small little bit of light, a small little bit of light. Sheifeya flows, and it comes down, misham, from the madreg of Chochma, which is Kadmas HaSeichel Lebechinas Bina, to the level of Bina. Lahavin, ulahasik, to understand and intellectually reach a little tiny bit of Seichel HaNela, of the hidden wisdom of the Eibishter. Which is why Gan Eden is called B'Shem the Kuda Be'echala, a point in a big chamber. The point would be Chachma, the chamber would be Bina. That's what it says in Bezeir HaKadosh, and this is what experiencing the Neshama is in Gan Eden. Now the Rebbe says, I want you to know, Neshama goes to Gan Eden and has pleasure. But it's not real pleasure. Because the Neshama in Gan Eden's pleasure comes not from knowing Hashem, it comes from understanding Hashem. And after understanding it as pleasure, the pleasure that one gets from understanding Hashem is so small relative to the pleasure of the Eibishter himself, that when you compare the pleasure of knowing Hashem Himself to the pleasure of understanding the Eibishter, like a point in a chamber. The Chochmah is higher than you in understanding, because Chochmah is the pure experience of pleasure of Hashem. This you don't have in Gan Eden. In Gan Eden you have only the understanding of Hashem and the pleasure that brings, which is a small light of the way it is in Chochmah. So we have two inyanim here. The first thing is that Gan Eden is the place of Bina, and the experience of Gan Eden is the pleasure of Getlichkeit, the pleasure of Judaism, the pleasure of experiencing godliness. And he says, you should know it comes from Chochmah. But the amount of Chochmah that's coming down into Gan Eden is insignificant, is very small. You with me? Yes? Zakter. That's the shape of the letter Yud of the Eibishter's name. That's a point. In physical terms, a Yud has 3 points, right? There's a Yud on top, a point on the top, and the point on the bottom, and the point on the left. But in Pnimis Hanyanim, the letter Yud represents one akud, or to say it in technical terms, a Yud has no length and no width. A Vav has a length and no width, and most letters have lengths and widths. 0 dimensions, 1 dimension, and 2 dimensions. And as I've explained it to you before, the 3rd dimension, this is us. This is Yiddishkeit that we do. So Yud is a point. Why? Because Yud is the real source of the pleasure of the Neshama having Gan Eden, but the Neshama in Gan Eden cannot experience the Yud, they can only experience the Hey. V'nikra Eden, and the Yud will be called Eden, which is of course a lot higher than Gan Eden. All of them are regarding Eden. It's written Ayin Leiras of a game, and no eye has ever seen Eden. V'nikra Aban, it's called the father that Yossi Brasa, that it's the foundation for the daughter. The daughter in this case means Malchus. Although in this particular context, we're talking about how the Yud is connected to the letter Hey and not connected to the letter, to the Inyan of Malchus. Pirish. So the Rebbe says, let me continue to explain to you what this means. Abba Yosad Berat. He starts off the Segeres HaKedesh by saying, what are Neshamas doing in Gan Eden? What's going on in paradise? What's going on? Neshamas are having pleasure from godliness. Correct? The pleasure that Neshamas are having from godliness comes from Bina. And Chochmah, which is higher than Bina, is there like a point in a room. And he says, this Chochmah, which is the source of the understanding and the pleasure from that understanding, which is in Gan Eden, is also Yosad B'rat that creates Malchus. And he explains, Pirish. And now he changes the subject. What did we learn till now? The pleasure of Gan Eden. The pleasure of Gan Eden comes from Bina, the Sheresh is Chochmah. Now we're going to start talking about words, letters. Whenever you say an idea, whenever you experience a pleasure, it's connected to words and ideas which carry that pleasure. The words and ideas which carry that pleasure are higher than the pleasure itself. They come from Chochmah. If the pleasure comes from Bina, the word comes from Chochmah. But like I told you in my introduction, there's 2 parts to the words. The inner part of the word comes from Chochmah. The Chitzenius, the Malchus part of the word comes from Malchus. He says like this, Pirish. When a person creates words of speech, and I want you to know that when we speak, nobody even thinks about it. When a 2-year-old talks, you make a big deal. I can't believe he's talking. Last week he didn't talk, because he hasn't talked before. But once a child learns to talk, we take it for granted. According to Chassidus, this is a very, very big ness, because in fact the act of speech is more difficult than the act of creating machines. It's even more difficult than the act of understanding political power plays. The seichel of midas is lower than the seichel of dibur. Hashem just built it into our hardwire that we should do it automatically. But to be sure, the ability to speak is more difficult than the ability to understand human emotions. So speech has a very high shadish. When you talk, you make sounds. In addition to making sounds, you put the sounds together to make words. This is called Keach HaTziraf. And to be sure, the shadish of Keach HaTziraf is higher than Chochmah. But there's the tzur of Eis Adibur, there's the shape and the form of the letters that you're speaking, and then there's the letters themselves. So he says like this, Pirish. When a person creates letters of which he speaks, that Hayet says that they radiate from the 5 sources of which a person speaks. When a person talks, the letters come from one of 5 sources. The throat creates Aleph Ches Hey Ayin. The palate up here creates Gimel Yud Chaf Kuf Ge Ye Ch Ke. The teeth create Dalantat, Dalad, Lamed, Nun, Tov, Tes. The lips create Bumf, Beis, Vav, Mem, Pei. And the lush in the teeth creates, I forgot what, like a shin, another grouping of oisius. So you have 22 sounds that come from 5 meitzahs, 5 sources, which means on average each meitzah has on average 4.5 letters. Right? He says like this. When a person speaks words, which comes from the 5 sources of speech, says the Rebbe, there's no seichel involved in speaking words, because if it was seichel involved in speaking words, it would take us forever to speak. Second of all, v'loi mutva b'teva metois halolu. It's not even in the nature of these different sources of sound. Lahoitzi mifta ha'esias, to bring out these sounds. Aidei hevel v'hakel, through air and voice. Hamake b'hen, which is beating against him. Al pi derech hateva, according to nature. V'loi al pi haseichel, derech haseichel, nor al pi seichel. When a person actually speaks words, and individual sounds come out, not only individual sounds, whether it's going to be from this moitzah, from that moitzah, acheh, gich, boom, talentant, and so forth, but which particular letter is also radiating from the mitzvah. Again, for example, hasvasayim aderech mashal, the lips, by way of analogy, she'oithias beis vav mem pei, the four letters beis vav mem pei, yaitas mehen, come from the lips. So that ein hateva v'lei haseichel, the nature of the person is not, nor is the wisdom of the person, neida, showing lietzias mifta arbas chelke shinuye bts yesel. If you looked at the neshama when it's saying a beis or a vav and mem or a pei, it doesn't make any distinction between these four letters. Shemisnea eis behevel echad v'keil echad, because they move around with one voice and with one inyan. Hapegeya bahen, which is hitting against them, b'shava, in an equal way. In other words, when you say a beis or a vav or a mem or a pei, where did the different sounds come from? If we say a beis or a gimel, I say the beis comes from the lips, the gimel comes from the palate. But a beis and a vav both come from the lips. What's the difference? It's not nikki, you cannot see it in the mitzvahs. But adrabah, moreover, shinuye atnuas shebesvasayim, the fact that the lips move in different ways, hu lefishini biti eses sheberatz. It's not like in your gashmi as the kaguf, there is a possibility for each one of these different sounds. Beis, vav, mem, and pei all come from the lips. The lips don't premeditate either the beis or the vav or the mem or the pei. It happens by itself. Levate besvasayim kertzein, that it should express sounds as it desires. Leima, to say ois beis, the letter beis, oi vav, the letter vav, oi mem, the letter mem, oi pei, the letter pei. V'loi lehepech, not the contrary. She'iratzan ha'nefesh v'kavanasa, the will of the neshama is la'aseh shinuyit nuyis hasvasayim, to make the various different sounds that come from the lips. As they move after now, but which moving these four letters. So you have 5 sources of speech. From these 5 sources come 22 or 27 letters. That means whole groupings of letters come from one, whole grouping of letters come from another. What causes one letter to come out as opposed to another letter to come out, you cannot explain. We see an actual fact. A person is not paying attention and knowing lechav, to have an intent, klal whatsoever, to with the different movements of his lips, in these various different changes. When you speak, you don't worry about how the words are going to sound. You don't worry about how the words are going to sound. You just speak and the words come out. The same is true when the neshama speaks beis or vav or mem or pei, and we have this problem. Or them all coming from the same mitzvah. The real reason a beis comes out, or a vav comes out, or a mem comes out, or a pei comes out is because he wants it. This is even more evidence. Bebitoi hanekudis, in expressing the different vowels. In other words, I could say even an aleph, yeah? So instead of an aleph, I could say ches, hey, or vav, or a yud. But instead of aleph, could be a komet aleph, a patach aleph, a tedi agav, a segel aleph, a shvar aleph, a chelim aleph. Shekshanef, the person wants to make the sound of a komet aleph, male automatically, nikmat, must sign the lips form into the shape of a komet. Ubepesach niftachim hasvasayim. And when you say the letter patach, the sound patach, the lips are opened up. Right? So when you say komet or aleph, just like when you say aleph or ches, the difference between aleph and ches, the difference between komets and beis are not only in the might and the source of the word, it's in the nefesh itself. The yes and niraken, this is even clearer with b'tiana kudus, when a person expresses not just words but vowels. The person wants to say the sound of a letter komas. Automatically the lips square up into a komas. We want to say the sound patach. Niftim, lips open up. It's not only the will of the nefesh, likmates to make a komas, not to make a patach, kal whatsoever. But it happens automatically. In laharich. This is a simple statement that I just said, that is understood and intellectually reached by every intellectual. First of all, which letter is going to come out from the 4 or 5 or 6 letters linked to a particular mitzvah? And the vowels which are going to come forward will move us beyond human intellect. It comes from a hidden level of seichel. And before seichel, higher than seichel. Shabbenefesh, hamadaberes, in the soul of a person who could speak. This is the reason that a person can't speak even though he doesn't understand. A child can't speak even though he understands everything, because the ability to speak comes from Ratz. That's what the Alter Rebbe say. Ideas come from Bina. Okay? Words come from Malchus, but the source of the words come from Chochmah. Just like Chochmah, the source of the understanding, Chochmah, the source of the words and ideas. What does that mean? You have a mitzvah, you have an ability to create sounds, but when the sounds actually come out, it's a nes. Because the sounds come from a very, very high Madarei. Which letter comes out then, which vowel you're going to make comes from a very high Madarei. So how many things we know about a person speaking? The idea comes from Bina, and the shadish of the Bina comes from Chochmah. When a person speaks, the words come from Malchus, the shadish of the words comes from Chochmah. Right? That's it. Questions or comments?